Welcome, my dear friends, for a wonderful evening. COPD management, though looks very simple for most of the pulmonologists, before writing down our prescription, a whole lot of thought process goes in. Whether our patient fits for monotherapy, whether our patient fits for dual therapy or triple therapy. Besides which what additional bronchodilators, oral bronchodilators that we need to add? Is there any role of prophylactic antibiotic? So much of thought process goes in each of us minds. I call this kind of individualizing medicine to each patient is nothing but practicing the precision medicine. So among our patients, COPD patients, whom we can prescribe the triple therapy, to clarify all our doubts, we have two phenomenal speakers with us today. The first one is Dr. Indranil. He is currently Associate Professor from JNM Hospital, Kalyani, West Bengal. To his credits, he has been invited as speaker for multiple national conferences, and to his peculiarity, he has got an additional, specialization in pediatrics, and he will be dealing with COPD management in India and the need of triple therapy, where we will be looking forward for his thoughts. The second one, Dr. Nityan Abhyankar, yes, to the Indian Pulmonologist Forum, no, including from postgraduates to senior most, no one needs, everyone knows about Dr. Nitin. He doesn't need any introduction, but he has his master degree in general medicine. He has a European diploma in respiratory medicine, currently heading the Department of Respiratory Medicine at Pune Hospital, Pune. He is the founder, director of School of Intervention Pulmonology at Pune Hospital. He is an expert intervention pulmonologist with special interest in medical thoracoscopy, and he is known for medical lung biopsies via medical thoracoscopy, and he has largest series in the world to his credentials. He also has largest series of EBUSs that he practiced through transnasal route. Dr. Nitin will be dealing with new paradigm in COPD management and role of single inhaler therapy, single inhaler triple therapy. So with this, I hand over mic to Dr. Indranil for further proceedings. My dear CCI audience, please post your questions, queries, so that we'll get it clarified. We will discuss all these points in the Q&A session. And if any suggestions you need to add, we are looking forward to receive it. Dr. Indranil, over to you.
Myself, Dr. Indranil Haldar, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Pulmonary Medicine, College of Medicine and JNM Hospital. In the onset, I should thank the Chest Council of India for hosting such an academic session in the times of the COVID. My special thanks to my friend, Dr. Krishna, to Dr. Narayan Pradeepa and Vijay Kumar Chennamchetty for giving me the responsibility to talk on this interesting topic on COPD management in India, need for triple therapy. COPD, which is a common, preventable and treatable disease, that is characterized by persistent airflow symptoms and airflow limitations caused by significant exposure to noxious particles and gases. So COPD is the leading cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide and induces economic and social burden that is both substantial and is increasing. To highlight the burden of COPD, the high mortality and morbidity in India, if you see the ranking in 2009, COPD was down in the 4th, which has changed its position to the 2nd rank in the year 2019. And this increase in chance of the cause, and it has become the 2nd cause of total number of deaths, an increase in 35.4% increase in chance when all of the communicable, non-communicable disease and injuries are to be taken together. And in India, it is the 3rd cause of death and disability in 2019. So this is the high impact of the burden of COPD. So if we go to this publication in Lancet of the global disease burden, chronic respiratory disease collaborators, which discuss the prevalence and attributable healthcare burden of chronic respiratory disease from 1990 to 2070, COPD remains the most preventable disease-specific chronic respiratory disease worldwide in 2017. It is also the most common cause of chronic respiratory disease attributable death and accounted for the majority of chronic respiratory disease associated disability adjusted life years. Just to highlight the global rank of COPD for India, the first global rank for DALY due to COPD in 2017, and the 2nd global rank for death in COPD patients 2017, which is the high impact of COPD in India. Again, coming to the chronic respiratory disease attributable DALY rates by risk factor, the risk factor because of the ambient ozone pollution, ambient particulate matter pollutions, air pollution from solid fuels, from occupational health, smoking and second-hand smoking. If you see, the low income and middle income countries account for a large portion of the global burden of COPD. And unfortunately, what is seen is that this share is likely to increase sharply over coming decades due to the aging population and less successful tobacco and air pollution control, which we should or could have achieved. But again, unfortunately, it is undertreated, maltreated, underdiagnosed. Why? Symptomatic people are often late in seeking care because of insufficient awareness of the disease, and it is the later part of this disease when the patient goes for consultation, and it is very difficult for them to put in the right track. And again, the women population at the early stage of the disease are less symptomatic than men, which combined with their less common health-seeking behavior poses an additional charges. So patient presents late and are diagnosed late in terms of their disease. Now, if you go to the goals of treatment for stable COPD by the Goal 2021, which is the oft-quoted guidelines, unfortunately the guidelines which is regularly updated. In order to improve the quality of life, we have to reduce symptoms, improve exercise tolerance, and improve the health status of the patients of COPD. And in order to reduce the risk of the patients of COPD, we have to prevent disease progression, prevent and treat exacerbation, and reduce the morbidity of these patients. And practically, this is the chart which shows the COPD management. So this is one of the combined assessment of COPD, whereas in this axis, we have the symptoms, which can be assessed by modified Medical Research Council scale or the CAT score. And on this axis, we have the exacerbation. So any patients who have a MMRC scale of 0 to 1 is thought to be less symptomatic, or a CAT score of less than 10 is thought to be less symptomatic. So if we divide this, these are the people who are less symptomatic for COPD, and these are the people who are more symptomatic for COPD. On this axis, we have exacerbation. So whereas less exacerbators are those with 0 or 1 moderate exacerbation not leading to hospitalization, and more exacerbators are those more than equal to 2 moderate exacerbations or more than 1 leading to hospitalization. So in this part of this group are the patients who are having more exacerbation, and this part are the less exacerbation. So with this, we have 4 groups: group A, B, C, and the D. The group A people, less symptomatic, less exacerbation. Group B people, more symptomatic, less exacerbation. Group C are less symptomatic, more exacerbation. And group D, the worst of the lot, having more exacerbation and more symptoms. So to place the drugs according to the severity of the disease, in group A, if we go by the GOLD guidelines, where we require a bronchodilator to relieve their symptoms. Group B, a long-acting bronchodilator, either a long-acting beta-2 agonist or a long-acting muscarinic agents. Group C, the drug should be a LAMA. And the group D, in fact, all of the drugs that are there in the armamentarium, and which includes the LABA, LAMA, ICS, a combination of them. So once we select the drug, the follow-up pharmacological treatment depends upon whether the patient is dyspneic or is having an exacerbations. If response to initial treatment is appropriate, manage it accordingly. If not, we can consider the predominant treatable trait to target dyspnea or exacerbation. We can use the exacerbation pathway if both exacerbation and dyspnea need to be targeted. And if you see the dyspnea, we can start with LABA or LAMA, and then if symptomatic, we can combination LABA or LAMA. And if we are starting with a LABA or a ICS, so when can we consider patient with inhaled corticosteroid? So in fact, there are exacerbation history, as we told, but another important way, what the GOLD states, and there are good publications and evidence in support of it, is the blood eosinophil count. So if the eosinophil count is more than 300, or an eosinophil count of 100 and 2 or more exacerbation, moderate, or 1 hospital exacerbation, then we can consider of inhaled corticosteroids. So as the patient recovers, de-escalation of inhaled corticosteroid or switch if there is improvement in symptoms, or if there is a pneumonia, then we can switch off or de-escalate from inhaled corticosteroid to a LABA-LAMA combination. In fact, patients who are not relieved with LABA-LAMA can be considered for switching to other inhaled device or a molecule, and definitely investigation and treatment for other causes of dyspnea is to be found out. Similarly, the exacerbation arm, a LABA-LAMA, if not controlled, LABA ICS, definitely ICS is to be considered in patients either with an exacerbation or a history of blood eosinophilia, as told, more than 300 or 100 if there is exacerbations. So if the eosinophil count is less than 100, then we can think of 2 groups of patients in this exacerbation. In former smokers, we can think of macrolides, low-dose macrolides in different regimes. Alternate day low-dose macrolides, that is azithromycin, can be given. Or in patients who have chronic bronchitis and the FEV1 is less than 50, roflumilast may be considered. So this is the overall drugs that we have from our armamentarium, and placing the appropriate drugs in right place. Now, why is there a need for all of the drugs to be used in these patients of COPD? So this is from different publications, from the Primary Care Respiratory Medicine published in 2020, some publications in New England Journal of Medicine, and Respiratory Medicine, all combined. We see that about 84% of the patients have high symptom burden despite the use of a LABA ICS therapy. And 23 to 50% patient experience COPD exacerbation despite a LABA-LAMA therapy. Not only that, about 25 to 50% patient experience COPD exacerbation despite LABA ICS therapy. That's the real story behind it. So our patients of COPD are poorly controlled when they are using two drugs, LABA ICS or LABA LAMA therapy. If we go by the GOLD 2021 about the use of all of these three drugs, LABA, LAMA, and ICS, the GOLD states that the step up in inhalation therapy to LABA plus LAMA plus ICS, that is commonly called as triple therapy, occurs by various approaches and has been shown to improve the lung function, patient-reported outcome, and reduction in the exacerbations. Not only that, the beneficial effect of a fixed dose triple inhaler therapy versus a fixed dose LABA-LAMA combination on mortality in symptomatic COPD patients with a history of frequent and/or severe exacerbations who were previously receiving maintenance therapy with triple therapy. So there is a beneficial effect when a fixed dose triple therapy is used in these patients. Coming to another important study, the patterns study. So it was a self-reported questionnaire was designed to understand the use of long-acting bronchodilators by physician. It was a questionnaire randomly administered to clinicians, those who were treating COPD across India in between September 2019 to January 2020, and 322 Indian physicians participated in, and this is what the result came out. More than 63% of the physicians reported about a 1 or 2 exacerbation per year in majority of their COPD patients. That is, COPD patient presented late in their symptoms to the physicians, and to our astonishment, 93% of the physicians reported that the majority of their COPD patient had breathlessness in the MMRC grade 2, that is in the group either B or D. These are also the severe later stage of the COPD patients. Coming to the drug use, 40% of the physicians preferred a triple drug ICS, LABA and then LAMA on first line therapy for COPD management in patients with history of more than 2 exacerbation or in 1 exacerbation requiring 2 hospitalization. So they were comfortable with the triple therapy, and 19% physician preferred an ICS LABA-LAMA as a first line therapy for COPD management in the symptomatic COPD patient. The reason may be many. Overuse of inhaled corticosteroid in COPD is there, but again, a real life picture where this inhaled corticosteroid was used in this patient was there. So it is because maybe that initially it is maybe difficult for the clinician or the physician to diagnose whether this patient were really pure COPD or a combination of COPD asthma was there, or clearly distinguish with the watershed line between asthma and COPD. Just a theoretical basis on how these three class of drug acts together. The corticosteroid has an anti-inflammatory effect, the LABA-LAMA on the bronchodilators, but definitely these two drugs have a synergistic effect on the corticosteroid, and LABA-LAMA has also a synergistic effect on the anti-inflammatory and the bronchodilation. So all of the drug acts in the same, helping the anti-inflammation and bronchodilation that is there in patients of COPD. Now come to what are the permutation combination of corticosteroid, budesonide versus fluticasone or other combination of beclomethasone, the LABA, the formoterol versus salmeterol, LAMA, tiotropium versus glycopyrronium. So the permutation combination is another important thing that is to be seen. Now coming to some evidence, real life trials or multicentric randomized control trials to show that this combination of triple therapy works. We have a lot of trial, the Trinity, Trilogy, Tribute, Impact, Kronos, and a few other are also coming up. Just to highlight a few, the Trilogy, where these beclomethasone, formoterol, and glycopyrronium fixed dose has greater effect on the quality of life and in the prevention of moderate to severe exacerbation versus the dual drug, that is the formoterol with beclomethasone combination. The Trinity, the beclomethasone, the formoterol, and the glycopyrronium combination in the fixed dose was superior to tiotropium in reducing exacerbation and improving pulmonary functions in COPD patients. And in fact, if we see the once daily single inhaler triple therapy versus dual therapy in patients of COPD, triple therapy with fluticasone, imidacloprid, and vilanterol, they all have a lower rate of moderate to severe COPD exacerbation than fluticasone vilanterol or the imidacloprid and vilanterol combination. Lower rate of hospitalization due to COPD due to the combination drug dual combination, but higher incidence of pneumonia as expected because of the inhaled corticosteroid containing therapy compared to the UV containing therapy. So definitely when steroid is used, chances of pneumonia is more. So this is from the International Journal of COPD, the editorial comment on the COPD appraisal of single inhaler therapy in this triple therapy in COPD. So their editorial comment was the single triple therapy has been shown to be superior at reducing exacerbation and improving quality of life compared to the LABA/LAMA, especially in patients with prior history of frequent exacerbation and blood eosinophilia who have ICS responsive disease. The corollary is that patients with infrequent exacerbation who are non-eosinophilic may be safely de-escalated from triple therapy to LABA/LAMA without loss of control. That's another important corollary. So there are a specific subset of patients in whom we can initiate triple therapy to have the relief of their symptoms. Now, the combination of the triple therapy with glycopyrronium, formoterol, and budesonide. There are two important trials, the Kronos trial, which includes a phase 3 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study in 215 sites with 40 to 80 years, current or former smokers, with about 1,902 patients who were randomized into budesonide, glycopyrronium, formoterol, and budesonide, formoterol, and open-label budesonide, formoterol dry powder inhalers. And the study duration was for 24 weeks. And the ETHOS trial, here also it was a phase 3 randomized double-blind parallel group study with 26 countries, again 40 to 80 years, symptomatic COPD patients. Here about 8,000, more than 8,000 patients were randomized into budesonide, glycopyrronium, formoterol versus budesonide, glycopyrronium, formoterol and glycopyrronium, formoterol and budesonide, formoterol group with a 52 weeks study duration. Not going to the details, but the triple therapy with these three combination was superior to dual therapy with glycopyrronium, formoterol or budesonide, formoterol in terms of greater improvement in lung functions, lower mortality, improved symptoms and quality of life, lower exacerbation, lesser use of rescue medication, and with a similar safety profile. So thank you, and we'll be ready to answer questions which will be posted. So thank you for your hearing.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Indranil, for making my job so much easier. You have put all the three important components of this triple therapy, that is budesonide, glycopyrronium, and formoterol, individually in the correct context of where do they fit in today's therapy, what is their real value, what are the good points and what are the bad points, and everything has been dissected so beautifully by you that now I can take the audience through the evidence which is on the triple therapy in the management of COPD. And this evidence is actually, we have been seeing this evidence emerging, but what I'm going to focus on is two which are named as Kronos and ETHOS. And this is very important from the point of view of looking at what is the word. And Kronos was a trial which was done in close to 4 countries and 215 sites, and ETHOS was done in around 26 countries. Both of them were phase 3 randomized double-blind parallel group control studies. Both of them have studied essentially COPD patients between 40 to 80 age group, and as the baseline. So they were all smoker COPDs, current or past smokers. In the Kronos, they were symptomatic COPD patients who were moderate to severe COPD, and essentially they were symptomatic despite receiving 2 or more inhaled maintenance therapies for at least 6 weeks before the screening. In the Ethos trial, on the other hand, they have had P80, they were moderate to severe, but they at least had one moderate or severe COPD exacerbation, or at least 2 moderate or at least 1 severe exacerbation in the year before the screening. And if you look at the number of patients, this is nearly 2,000, this is nearly 8,500, and this is a substantially large number of patients that we are looking at. So I think that should make us take these data very seriously. Now, the second component of it is, what are the study groups? Now, essentially, in Kronos, they were trying to compare the triple therapy, that is glycopyrronium, formoterol, budesonide, in 18, 9.6, 320 dose, to glycopyrronium formoterol group, which is 18 and 9.6, and budesonide formoterol group, which is 320 and 9.6. And then there was an open label budesonide, formoterol, and dry powder group also. So that is again something very interesting to look at. So this is what they were comparing with each other. The Kronos trial is essentially looking for a superiority in the terms of FEV1 change or the lung function improvement, and Ethos trial, which was comparing glycopyrronium formoterol budesonide in one group, glycopyrronium formoterol and budesonide in a little lower dose of budesonide, 320 versus 160. Then there is a glycopyrronium formoterol group, and then there is a budesonide formoterol group. And this trial, which is running for nearly 1 year, this trial which is running for 24 weeks, here the endpoints that we are looking at is lung function related, and here the endpoints that we are looking at were exacerbations related. So we will see this in the next slide. What are the primary endpoints of Kronos? As I told you, they were looking at lung function. So what they have looked at is FEV1, area under the curve from 0 to 4 hours over 24 weeks is the primary endpoint. And of course, the change from the baseline in the morning pre-dose FEV1 over at 24 weeks. Whereas here we are essentially looking for the annual rate of moderate or severe COPD exacerbation. So that is something which is exacerbation oriented. The second endpoints here is baseline in FEV1 within 4 hours after dosing at around 24 weeks. Rate of moderate or severe COPD exacerbations, TDI focal score at 24 weeks, change from the baseline daily rescue medicines over 24 weeks, change from the baseline in the SGRQ score, so the functional improvement as perceived by the patient, and time to clinically important deterioration were the secondary endpoints of Kronos. For Ethos, the secondary endpoints were time to the first moderate or severe COPD exacerbation, annual rate of severe COPD exacerbations, change from baseline in average daily use of rescue medicine, percentage of patients who had SGRQ response, and most importantly, time to death from any cause, though it was a secondary cause, but has shown up some interesting results when we start looking at the data. Now, complex table, BZ table as we call it, but I think we'll try to go through it in a simple way. What we are looking at is, on the age group, they were all between 60 to 70, you can say. There were more males there in all these. Around 40% of them, if you really look at the numbers, they were all around 40% of them were smokers or active smokers. Of course, some of them had exacerbations, and you can compare these also. Many of them were using rescue medications, and then the BDI focal score, mean post-salbutamol FEV1 was around 50% in both these study groups, and the reversibility to salbutamol, interestingly, it was seen in around 40-45% of these patients that there was a reversibility also. The bronchodilator reversibility was seen here in around 30% of the patients. So that is interesting in the context of COPD, because we always call COPD as a disease with fixed obstruction, but there seems to be something more to it than what it appears. And then the CAT and the AGRQ scores. And then if you really look at all the groups in between, inside this trial as well as inside this trial, they are reasonably comparable on their epidemiological data. So now we move on to what did we see as results. Of course, we were focusing on, as I said, lung function. So lung function, there is a significant improvement in the lung function as compared to either of the dual therapies. So when you take glycopyrronium formoterol budesonide, which is your violet circles, you can say, they are clearly above the green as well as the red and the blue. That means the budesonide formoterol metered-dose inhaler and glycopyrronium formoterol metered-dose inhaler are comparable, I mean, in their efficacy, and the glycopyrronium formoterol MDI is superior. How much was the increase that we got? The increase when it is compared with, say, budesonide formoterol between as a dual therapy, which is considered the gold standard popular dual therapy before we have to really introduce inhaled corticosteroids, and that increase was around 104 ml in addition over the budesonide formoterol group. So when I use a triple therapy, I seem to be getting much better on the lung function. I'm sorry, I have to go back one slide. And also, if you looked at the adjusted mean change from baseline morning dose trough FEV1, again, if you compare with glycopyrronium formoterol, it's around 22 ml. So glycopyrronium formoterol, of course, is a better dual bronchodilator. When it is budesonide formoterol, it's considerably larger difference of around 74 ml has been noticed. So if you really see that there is something which the inhaled corticosteroid seems to be adding to this whole mix in the terms of lung function as well. And important, because you are looking for eosinophils as an important parameter, whether to add eosinophil. One of the criteria that we use in group 4 COPD or group D COPD is whether the eosinophils are more or not. And what has been found in this particular trial is irrespective of whether the eosinophil is less than 150 or it is more than 150, in all the subgroups which are comparable, whether you are comparing with glycopyrronium formoterol, whether we are comparing with budesonide formoterol, or versus a open label budesonide formoterol DPI. So this the study was a metered-dose inhaler. So if you really looked at that, in all these, essentially, this is favoring the triple therapy. So what we are getting is we are getting greater benefit in the lung function versus budesonide formoterol, and for that matter, all other combinations also, irrespective of the blood eosinophil counts. The benefit in lung function with glycopyrronium formoterol only in patients with eosinophil counts greater than 150. So that was something which is worth keeping a note of. Now, you look at the exacerbations in the ETHOS trial. We come on to the results of the second trial. We have touched upon CHRONOS already in detail. Now, let us see the results of the second trial. And now what you are getting is significantly lower annual, when you looked at the exacerbations, what is happening is, when compared to glycopyrronium formoterol, there is around 24% reduction. And when compared to budesonide formoterol, there is around 13% reduction in the moderate or severe COPD exacerbations versus a dual therapy. So if you really looked at the hazard ratio as 1.08, here, I'm sorry, the number of exacerbations is 1.08, here it is 1.42, and with the budesonide formoterol, it is 1.24. Now, if you really look at the time taken, that significantly prolongs the time to the first moderate or severe exacerbation versus dual therapy. And again, once again, this is statistically significant in the terms of p-values which are looking impressive. So I think what we are getting as a message is, one, a lower annual rate and it also prolongs the time to the first moderate to severe exacerbation. It makes sense that these two things are more or less similar in their context. Once again, very important to observe that because we are thinking that addition of steroids in some way or the other is benefiting certain subgroup of patients, which is eosinophil dominant, but across the board, once again, whether it is less than 150 or more than 150, we are getting nearly same or similar results. Of course, there is a numerical difference, but it is not reaching any statistically. Either ways, it favors the triple therapy. So whether we are comparing glycopyrronium formoterol as a dual therapy, or whether you are comparing budesonide formoterol as a dual therapy with the triple therapy of glycopyrronium formoterol and budesonide, the clear message that you are getting is, irrespective of the eosinophil counts, you are getting a reduction in the annual rate of moderate or severe exacerbations. Now, this brings us to other concepts of it, whether the patients are using ICS, whether the patient have shown reversibility to albuterol, whether the patients are not on ICS, and whether the patient has no albuterol. In all these subgroups, once again, the triple therapy is clearly favoring and reducing the number of exacerbations. You can see there's 1.03, 1.14, 0.84, and 1.10 as the lowest as compared to all the comparators in all these subgroups of patients also. So if you looked at that, so what it once again seems to indicate that whether there's a reversibility or not, whether the patient is on ICS or not, previously on ICS or not, really did not make much of a difference. Once we start them on a triple therapy, they seem to be doing better. Now, this is one of the secondary endpoints and has shown some very, very interesting data of lower mortality versus dual therapy, either of the dual therapies. And this seems to be a very interesting observation, which was a secondary endpoint. Mind you, this was not a primary endpoint, but the death from any cause in the intention to treat population, when you compare it with glycopyrronium formoterol, it is less by around 46%. This is time to death from any cause over the 52 weeks. And when we use a triple therapy, the significant difference is around 46%. With a budesonide formoterol, it is around 22%. So these are the two databases that we are looking at. And what seems to be again an interesting observation which has emerged from this study is the cardiovascular events, which were say 11 in number in the triple therapy, 16 in number in the budesonide glycopyrronium formoterol, which is at 160 dose. And when I come to glycopyrronium formoterol, it is 28, so nearly more than double, and budesonide formoterol comparable to budesonide triple therapy. So the budesonide formoterol, the budesonide component somehow is attributed in this trial for reduced cardiovascular events. Of course, we are also having the other events, and there is a difference between them in a substantial way, but the main numerator addition of the cardiovascular events seems to be increasing the mortality in budesonide formoterol group maximum as compared to the triple therapy. Now, significantly improved dyspnea and respiratory symptoms. So symptoms in the Kronos trials were clearly low. We come back to the Kronos trial here again, and we can see that yes, there is a significantly improved dyspnea and the respiratory symptoms as compared to either the open label budesonide formoterol or budesonide formoterol MDI in both. It's not so much so when you are comparing it with glycopyrronium formoterol alone, because of the maximum bronchodilation that is already achieved by these two combination bronchodilators, and significantly improved quality of life by looking at the SGISQ total score over 24 weeks. It's down by 1.22 when versus glycopyrronium formoterol versus budesonide formoterol, it's minus 45, and versus open label budesonide formoterol, it is minus 1.26. So that's the kind of a difference that we are essentially looking at. and once again significantly reduce rescue medication uses. So all these parameters in the Kronos trial, which are showing improvement in the lung function and a meaningful improvement in the lung function, which you have seen at around 104 ml, additional improvement in the lung function has led to a significant changes in all these issues of quality of life, rescue medication usage. Everywhere you are seeing substantial change and statistically significant change when we are looking at these parameters when there is a triple therapy in comparison to the double therapy. And of course, clinically important deterioration over 24 weeks, which was one of the secondary parameters here. It shows that as compared to the triple therapy, we are seeing with budesonide formoterol and with open label budesonide formoterol substantial, significant, statistically significant change seen. It's not so much so seen with glycopyrronium formoterol group. So that brings us to the last component of, are we paying any price of using the triple therapy over a double therapy, dual therapy, or the other alternatives, whether you're using a combination of glycopyrronium formoterol or budesonide formoterol. And if you looked at it, most of the side effects were comparable, barring of course one, where you can see that there is clearly a higher incidence of pneumonias when you use a triple therapy. It is higher in Ethos trial also, it's around 4.2%, and here it is around 2%. And it's lesser in glycopyrronium formoterol group. It is similar in the budesonide formoterol group, again 2%. That is expected because budesonide is known to be, I mean, any inhaled corticosteroid is known to increase the risk of pneumonias or confirmed pneumonias is there. But then if you look at the mortality death related to all causes in the triple therapy, it's only 1%. And if you really look at it, it's 0.9% in the Ethos trial, and Ethos trial was the one which was looking at exacerbations, and the mortality also was an important secondary parameter, and it was clearly reduced in comparison to both the comparators, whether it was budesonide glycopyrronium formoterol or whether it is budesonide formoterol. The mortality was less and significantly less in this particular age. So what the wisdom has been telling us all along is that yes, there is a higher incidence of pneumonia when you add any inhaled corticosteroid. Possibly that risk is minimal with budesonide, as Dr. Indranil has already pointed out to you, but the pneumonia is possibly not contributing to the deaths as much as maybe the cardiovascular events are. So I think this is something which is worth exploring further, and I think more light to this is going to emerge in the years to come. So the evidence of this in Indian patients, is there some kind of data we have? And this is a small amount of data that we have. This is a very, very tiny study comparatively to the kind of trials that we have seen. Here is a trial which was done where in the screening period, washout, then a run-in period, and then people were given glycopyrronium formoterol with a nebulizer device and glycopyrronium alone with an inhaler device, and a budesonide also was added to both these patients. So patient group. So this becomes a triple therapy, and this becomes a dual therapy. I mean dual therapy because glycopyrronium and budesonide is used here in this situation. So this study population, subjects of age between 40 to 65, moderate to severe COPD patients. Patients received for 12 weeks either a combination of glycopyrronium, formoterol, and budesonide, or glycopyrronium and budesonide. It's a little odd combination, but I think because they were already doing that trial of comparing the dual versus single, and then they added budesonide and continued that, and then they did a post-hoc analysis on that. Some interesting insights were observed that if they were in a triple therapy, whenever they were in a triple therapy, there is a significant improvement in the lung function. And this was with a statistical significance once again. And glycopyrronium formoterol significantly reduced the use of rescue medication. Once again, was a short trial and was effectively showing that there's a reduction in the rescue medications. And the triple therapy significantly improved the CAT score and the MMRC score also. So mm, uh, that that is the message which is coming out of it. This is a safety profile and reasonably comparable. There is not much difference in them. So I think this is something which is, of course, worth noting. It's a small data, but seems to be giving us some answers as to whether Indian patients are also benefiting by that. There is some data related to the single use inhaler use versus multiple inhaler use, because all of us have been practicing this triple therapy in one form or the other. So, for example, many of my patients are were on formoterol budesonide before and added tiotropium to them, or they were on glycopyrronium formoterol and we have added inhaled budesonide to that. So all permutation and combinations have existed in our practice, and where we tend to use multiple doses. Is there a data which will compel us to use a single inhaler versus multiple inhalers? There is some data, I wouldn't say it will compel us to use, but it should be kept in mind that yes, whenever a single inhaler users have all the three drugs in one single in one capsule twice, that is very easy comparatively. Therefore, single inhaler users had a lesser discontinuation rate than the multiple inhaler users. And this data comes from around nearly 30,000 patients, a large database. At the end of 1 month, 3 months, and 12 months, significantly higher number, and the statistical significance reached here, that significantly higher numbers who are using multiple inhalers had more dropouts or discontinuations which were observed. Patients with single inhaler triple therapy had greater improvement and efficacy in pounds versus those who were on multiple inhaler therapy. And once again, the CAT score, the FEV1s, and the pneumonias all were different. When you used multiple inhalers, there seems to be a problem, and it did reach statistical significance in the CAT and the FEV1. Definitely, the pneumonias were more or less comparable. And so I think that also should leave us with idea that yes, if I am going to use in a moderate to severe COPD, and I think this may summarize where I'm most likely to use it. So I'm looking at a moderate to severe COPD who's essentially symptomatic and surely had at least one exacerbation. I don't think I will have much doubt left after looking at all this data in the Neil's talk, my talk, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions which we'll address in the next few minutes with Vijay Kumar moderating this. So what we are trying to say here is there is a triple therapy now available in a single inhaler. Right now, what we have is a Rotacap which is to be inhaled by a nebulizer. Very soon, you will probably get inhaler, metadose inhaler with spacer also, which can be also utilized. So there is a new era emerging in the management of COPD where, if indicated, of course, let me tell you that if somebody is not only symptomatic and has never had an exacerbation, I would not be all that keen to put that patient on triple therapy. I'll be happy with giving him glycopyrronium formoterol as a dual therapy if he's a group B patient. But somebody who is getting exacerbations, so group C, group D onwards, I will definitely be considering this. And this consideration will be important, particularly if it is more than one exacerbations in the previous year. So that is where I see the role of the triple therapy emerging, triple therapy in a single inhaler in an emerging, very convenient to teach, very convenient to use from the patient, and therefore very good acceptance is expected. So with that, I take your leave and then over to Vijay Kumar for his moderation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic talk, Dr. Indranil and Dr. Nitin. What a great evening. So there is some, technical snag from Dr. Nitin's end. So meanwhile, I was trying to go through the questions which were posed by our audience. To my surprise, there are no questions. And everyone said, excellent, excellent. We have got all the clarity. Okay.
So,
Well,
Vijay, you have some of the questions with you. That's the thing.
No, there are already, by the halfway of the talk of Dr. Nitin, there were 30 questions already logged in. Okay. So we'll have, I'm just waiting for Dr. Nitin to join us so that, we can, rock the show. So meanwhile, Indranil, please, give your opinion on, here is a question asking about how do you identify your CPFE patient? Yes. Chronic pulmonary fibrosis combined with emphysema. Okay, combined pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema. Okay, how do you identify and manage such patients? Your thoughts.
So, see, COPD is again initially was classified into chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Initial part it was classified because according to some probably the prognostications and the management would have differed. But now again, when we think of the management of COPD, the goal, as already discussed, is reduction, improve the quality of life and improve the symptoms. Definitely, those patients who are having emphysematous variety, these are the patients, they respond poorly, and these are the patients who have, say, prognostication also poorer in that sense. So how to pick up those? Definitely spirometry will tell us. In fact, fixed airflow limitation will be there. DLCO in that sense will be decreased, but the best way to pick them are on radiological tools that are there. Good quality HSCT in that way can tell us whether the patients are really emphysematous or not. Definitely now that we have very good tools for these in fact, the lung functions in that way, body box and other things are there which can definitely pick up those patients who are really emphysematous. So, truly speaking, one from the history, second from the lung function test, DLCO, and radiology, that are tools that are in our hands to diagnose whether the patients are having emphysematous lung disease or not.
Here, the question was, Dr. Indranil, okay, the question was particularly whether if there is a combination of pulmonary fibrosis along with emphysema, how do you take?
Okay.
That's what is the question.
Yes, pulmonary, yes. In that way, definitely the radiology will be helping us. The patient with radiology will be helping us because the CT scan is very specific in those. There is, in fact, if in pulmonary fibrosis, usually there is a lung volume contraction, but in patients who are having pulmonary fibrosis with these emphysematous changes, they don't have any lung volume contraction. So when there is features of pulmonary fibrosis without volume contraction, we can think of patients having a combination of both of them. DLCO will be reduced in both of them.
Right. Dr. Nitin, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Sorry,
we were discussing. Yeah, there was some technical snag. We understood.
Correct.
Okay, we were discussing about your thoughts on management of combined pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema. Do you use triple therapy there as well? Or if at all you are going to use triple therapy, which patients you will put it on, triple therapy? And maybe it's my question, it's not audience question now. Okay, do you add antifibrotic there as well?
Hello.
There is some disturbance, voice disturbance from you.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, please.
Yeah, correct. I think in the combined pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema, it is a little difficult. It is a little difficult to realistically come to terms with this because you don't have data to back what you are going to say about it. But if you really ask me, I'm assuming that these patients are going to be more susceptible to exacerbations one way or the other, and it will be difficult to differentiate whether these exacerbations are coming from essentially COPD component of it, or whether it is coming from the pulmonary fibrosis component of it. It will be difficult to imagine that. So I would rather err on the side of using a triple therapy even in the CPFE, as long as there are exacerbations. I think it will be difficult to quantify them, which of them are coming from the fibrosis exacerbation and which of them is coming from a COPD exacerbation. But I think clinically relevant COPD exacerbation, I will definitely consider these patients for a triple therapy.
Right.
Vijay,
The second part of the question, antifibrotics in CPFE.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not just to finish that question. Indranil, meanwhile, can you add?
So these are the patients who are really bad patients. Okay. So in fact, it is no harm if you give them triple therapy to have the best of its results. Antifibrotic. Definitely, I will use antifibrotic according to the pulmonary fibrosis. If I think of, say, IPF, definitely I'll have to have the specific antifibrotic in those if the fibrosis is because of some other reasons, and then manage accordingly. So antifibrotic, yes. Triple therapy, since they are the bad patients and they are having frequent exacerbation, I will give the maximum benefit of all of this drug unless they develop pneumonia because of the inhaled corticosteroids.
Fantastic, right. That makes really sense, Indranil and Dr. Nitin. This question is to Dr. Indranil. Despite in group C, with more exacerbations than one, why do Gold suggested only LAMA as a choice?
Okay. See, if you see group C, these are the patients who are having exacerbation, but symptomatically they are less symptoms in terms of the MMRC or the CAT score. That is the reason, because they are less symptomatic, they are having more exacerbation. Only one group of bronchodilator, mainly the long-acting muscarinic agent, will be benefited to this patient to reduce the chance of exacerbations.
Right.
This is the reason practically why only LAMA have been advocated in the group C patients.
Right.
This is
but I think, I think this is a work in progress, and I'm sure this recommendation is going to change very soon. A group C patient who is more prone to exacerbations and consistently across the board, whether you have eosinophils or not, whether you have what kind of symptomatology you have, if you are documented to have exacerbations and a triple therapy is documented to have reduction in the exacerbations, possibly, today I agree with Indranil that we are right now what is written there in the guidelines is the LAMA alone. But I think in the real life practice, as well as in the future guidelines, I expect this to become a situation for at least a dual therapy with a budesonide formoterol, or budesonide glycopyranate, as one of the Indian studies has shown.
So Nitin, again, and Vijay, the Gold is clear in that way. So if your patient is not being relieved of that LAMA, you can jolly well add another combination LAMA, or if you think that ICS is justified, you can add that. So again, whether to initial part of your presentation, whether to start only LAMA or you want a combination. In real life, if you ask me, I will be going for a dual bronchodilator or in fact start steroid. It's my personal choice, but the guidelines again will go by evidence, go by meta-analysis and all those. But true that again, start with a LAMA. If not relief, you can go on adding drugs.
Right. Most of the patients, what we see in our practice, particularly when we are discharging them, we'll discharge them naturally on triple therapy. Yes, disease since ages. Okay, at least 2 decades. So, Dr. Nitin, when and how to call it as less is more? I mean, okay, when to de-escalate? How early to de-escalate? Do you wait for 3 months? Do you wait for 6 months? How do you identify that pattern so that the earlier we can de-escalate, the our patients will be on less number of medications.
Yeah, I think very rightly, as you said, when somebody goes out of a hospital, it is a very difficult game not to keep him on inhaled corticosteroid. Most of the times, he will be on inhaled corticosteroids in addition to a dual bronchodilation. So, a triple therapy will be a typical story in the beginning part of it. I think that duration should be at least 6 months, preferably even 1 year, to de-escalate if there is a relevant reason to do so. The relevant reasons are twofold. One, you are getting clearly harmed by the usage of inhaled corticosteroid. So if the inhaled corticosteroid per se is harming my patient, then I will definitely try to go back out of it. That is one reason. And the other is the patient no more really requires it. Now, how do I define that? I am defining it on the basis of exacerbations, and the exacerbation data is generally a 1 year data. So I think 1 year is going to be the real appropriate time. Maybe you can start thinking about it 6 months down the line, but I think 1 year is a realistic data point in time where you can say, okay, I have prevented exacerbation over last 1 year. The patient has been remarkably stable, and then was inhaled corticosteroid really contributing to it or not? If the patient was really needing it, I'll still continue with it. But if the patient is genuinely not needing it at all, I believe maybe wrongly I've put a group B patient here because there was one odd exacerbation and there's nothing, no clue of an exacerbation at all over 1 year, I will de-escalate. So I think large number of my patients will probably be on it because in India, I'm sure Vijay, you have the same experience. In general, you have the same experience. Our patients have more than two
Agreed.
exacerbations on most of the years. That they once they are in that zone, they are in that downward spiral. Their repeated admissions, the cost is a concern. They are paying out of their pockets. And then if something which is showing with a good amount of evidence, then apart from pneumonia, there is no real risk to the patient. And the pneumonias are generally manageable. In any case, we are managing pneumonias in large numbers all over this country, always. So I think I would be a little hesitant to take it out in a hurry. I wouldn't say I will not take it out. There has to be a solid reason to do it, and at least a year's period. These are the two things I'll keep in mind.
So, Vijay,
Quickly,
absolutely.
Indranil, quickly. Okay, how long you wait before de-escalate? Quickly, one word answer.
One word, I will not try to de-escalate if the patient is stable. That's the thing. Pneumonia, I will de-escalate. There are trials which shows that ultra-lama works well also. So if there is no pneumonia, I will continue. And if the patient is stable without exacerbation, definitely 1 year time period as told is correct thing, or even more than that, and the patient is stable, I will think of de-escalating.
Fantastic. Thank you. Here, there are many questions so far. Many have appreciated your both talks. Excellent talk, Dr. Nitin and Dr. Indranil. And there were, plenty of congratulatory messages. Dr. Umesh Prasad from Diogar has asked broadly about treatment of COPD. In 2 minutes, Dr. Indranil, classify, how do you manage COPD in your clinics?
So 2 minutes. First, confirm your diagnosis. Symptoms?
Yes.
Spirometry. Spirometry is very important. Definitely exposure to noxious particles should be there with symptoms, cough, shortness of breath. Do a spirometry. FEV post bronchodilator FEV1 by FBC less than 70. Look at the FEV1. Classify it into combined assessment. Symptomatic, less symptomatic, exacerbation, more exacerbation. Select a drug according to the combined assessment. A, B, C or D. A, just bronchodilator. B, LABA all LAMA. B, C, LAMA, and D, all of them, or accordingly. Now that once you have selected, try to find out whether he is dyspneic or exacerbator. And if the patient is more dyspneic, go on adding a drug, LAMA with a LAMA, and inhale corticosteroid accordingly. Definitely there are ways taking in consideration the eosinophil count, which the gold has also supported, but practically we do not do in most of the cases. But definitely if you have a high eosinophil count of more than 300 or 100 with more than 2 exacerbation, think of ICS. To me, only exacerbation you think of ICS, give ICS. If there is no pneumonia, continue with that. Patient remains stable, continue with, think of de-escalation as we told, say a year or in the down. 2 minutes, that should be my frame of treating COPD.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Easwaran from Madurai. Dr. Nitin, any recent advance in management apart from our regular bronchodilators? What is the future of management of COPD?
Yeah, very difficult question, because I think
Very difficult question, right?
the pipeline is pretty huge. Umaclinidinium, vilanterol combination is on the pipeline, so that is going to come. But these are permutation and combinations of
But more importantly,
bronchodilators.
Dr. Nitin, okay, what is the future of therapy means? Okay, there's a whole lot. Okay, every year that we are getting, new studies. A lot of development is happening. A lot of new molecules are in pipeline.
Correct.
And what is not covered here is role of pulmonary rehabilitation in COPD.
The lung volume
A whole
reduction
lot has
surgery. In fact, the lung volume, the stents that are available, in fact, the coils, the stent are there.
Yes.
In fact, that are very important. So, practically speaking, starting from the prevention of COPD, smoking, noxious particles, everything, the genetic factor is there also. The drugs, the ultralama, and the steroids, anyway, permutation, combination of them. And then now I'm coming to the lung volume reduction surgery, the stents, the coils. Practically, these are the things. Definitely the role of NIV. I will be thinking of those severe patients with carbon dioxide retention, hypercapnia. In fact, we are more liberal in using the NIV, not leaving aside the real specific patients who will be on long-term oxygen therapy. So, liberal on NIV, selecting patients on long-term oxygen therapy, lung volume reduction surgery with coils and stents.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think Vijay, we are talking of coils and stents as a theoretical lecture for a very long time. Has it become a reality in this country over the last decade? I have been listening to lectures about coils. No, I don't think. Is it likely to become a reality in the near future? I don't see that, because our patients are still paying out of their pocket. They are not covered by the cost, and the cost is horrendous. So I don't think that is the right thing.
Each coil was costing around 1 lakh rupees.
Yeah, what Indranil is saying is a very right observation. More and more of our patients can actually afford and are going towards home oxygen therapy, and a substantial percentage of them who are recurrently getting exacerbations and recurrent hypercapnic exacerbations will require and will benefit by NIV. I have number of patients who have been going on home NIV for good 4 years, 5 years already. So I think that is more of a reality in this country at this point in time, because one-time purchase of a non-invasive ventilation, one-time purchase of an oxygen concentrator is more cost sensitive and more pragmatic than looking at coils, because we have so many times I've identified people for coils. So many times I have identified people for even a transplant, but it doesn't really work out because these patients are elderly. They are really not good candidates for even a transplant. So I think, some of them will go for transplant if they are early emphysemas who are, young people. But elderly COPD, most of them will do better if they are given an early, or rather I would say timely, usage of home oxygen and NIV, in addition to robust pulmonary rehabilitation. I think we have not taken pulmonary rehabilitation all that seriously, and that is our folly. All of us have been doing that. That's something which is under the carpet for most of the setups.
It's true picture. My patient who is having a huge bulla doing lung volume reduction surgery, to that patient is also a hell of a job. Just a single bulla to be removed surgically, that's also again difficult. We require more cardiothoracic surgeon initiative to do that. In fact, these things.
So here comes the next question from Dr. Kumud Mehta from Mumbai. Which are common cause of ILD leading to COPD in adult life?
I
What are
didn't
the
get.
common causes of ILD leading to COPD in adult life?
I don't think I've understood this
Okay.
question. Sorry.
Right.
No, what he
And
wants is Miss ILD presenting like COPD pictures.
mhm.
Uh,
Maybe.
if
Maybe.
at all, I
Okay,
think
in the interest
I can
of
imagine
time, this
a
question.
confused CPFE or something of that sort. Where we are having two etiologies and we are mixing the two. Very frankly, I've not understood that question very clearly.
Right. Okay. No problem. Right. What is Dr. Sonu Tyagi from Meerut is asking about what are the precautions during work with our patients, COPD patients. Non-specific question again, but again, anything you want to add, Dr. Nitin, Dr. Indranil? What are
I
the
think one
general
thing.
precautions?
I think this is one. Maybe it's a tangent to what he's asking. But one insight I have understood in this corona pandemic is
Yeah.
that wearing a mask seems to make a big difference, and staying indoors and staying away from the crowd seems to making a big difference to the COPD exacerbations, because I think the overall number of COPD exacerbations I've encountered in the last 1 year is something like 1/100th of what I was encountering. And I'm not ready to believe that these patients have managed their exacerbations at home. I think there is a considerable number of reduction. And therefore, I have started encouraging some of my patients who are recurrently exacerbating to encourage them to wear a mask and maintain social distancing, and of course vaccinations and other stuff which we are already talking to them. So I think all that may go a long way in preventing exacerbations. So there's something which we have learned over with this pandemic, I feel, and that may be one of the methodologies of behaving with them. When don't make them sit in the crowded OPDs. Maybe separate them in time space and person from in so-called infected patients. Give them less number of infections, even in your clinic as well as at home and as well as in the community. So I think probably that might be the key to some future success in them. I'm not saying it cannot be a blanket advice, but it is worth practicing in patients, particularly those who are getting repeated viral or infective exacerbations.
Right. Here is a question from Dr. Sadia Ashraf. She is asking about a case scenario where a COPD patient, diabetic female with coronary artery disease, already on triple therapy, still having wheezing and breathlessness, even at rest or exertion with minimal exertion. She can't give any short-acting bronchodilator as this patient is having premature ventricular complexes. So how to manage this scenario? Good question,
Nice question.
Sadia.
I,
Yeah.
I think I'll think of it's a practical question, and I'll think of indicator glycopyrronium combination here for a bronchodilatory purpose, because that is likely to give me the best bronchodilator in the terms of long-acting LABA and probably with the least side effect profile. So
Yes.
that can be considered. Of course, you have to keep the ventricular premature complexes in mind, and therefore you can't be overdosing this patient with SABA. Agreed. A practical way out, which I have often found realistically useful, is actually using a formoterol budesonide on two ends of the day. That is formoterol and budesonide. So there is a little excess use of a beta 2 agonist if you add a glycopyrronium formoterol to this combination. And you have to be very careful. I'm not telling you to do this for all patients. You have to monitor them very closely. But we are talking of a patient who is symptomatic because of COPD, wheezing, and this is not a cardiac failure. You are convinced on that, then this might be the way out. It works for some patients. And there seems to be an increased beta 2 agonist tolerance in patients over a period of time. So some patients, and of course, once again, I'm anecdotal here, and it's a real life scenario. I'm giving you a real life answer. This is what I do to people who are symptomatic despite giving them the maximum. I am sure the care related to the cardiac safety becomes more and more important here. And well, I mean, there are no easy answers to this question,
Yes,
but I
it's
think
true.
this is the best.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Two important things. One, assessment, whether what is the cause of the shortness of breath. Cardiac, as Nitin already told, cardiac is to be ruled out in that way, and cardiac is to be managed. Antiarrhythmic drugs are to be kept ready, and close monitoring. Definitely the subject requires bronchodilation. Anticholinergics or long-acting, the drugs, ultra long-acting, that is indacaterol, definitely has a better cardiosafety. Steroids, in fact, on the heart, there are studies which have shown that inhaled corticosteroid definitely has a better effect on the heart. In fact, we can increase the dose to see whether the patient is in exacerbation. Starts with steroid. In that way, if the patient requires to reduce and to treat that exacerbation, the patient is increased shortness of breath probably because of an exacerbation. If infective, treat with antibiotic. Inflammation, treat it with steroids, and bronchodilation with very close monitoring so that the arrhythmia can be taken care of, not to overuse of bronchodilator, which we normally do in patients of COPD. In fact, we give maximum bronchodilation, and for that we overuse bronchodilator, not keeping in account of the cardiosafety of it. So very close and meticulous monitoring is required.
Yes, totally agree, Dr. Indranil. What happens here is we have to, besides this, whatever she has given the clinical details, whether the patient is in, actual COPD exacerbation or cardiogenic pulmonary edema,
challenge.
take care of it, divide it. And sometimes, if the patient is in actual exacerbation, we have to manage the exacerbation properly with antibiotic and steroid, if required, oral steroids as well. Next question from Mumbai, Dr. Kishore Jumani. Incidence of tuberculosis in COPD patients, drug interactions between anti-tubercular therapy and COPD drugs.
Okay. Taking it first, it has been proved that patients on inhaled corticosteroid, chances of developing tuberculosis is more. But again, inhaled corticosteroid is not contraindicated in patients who are having tuberculosis or cavitating tuberculosis. Next, drug interaction with anti-tubercular drugs and COPD. So again, COPD treatment comes with inhaled drugs. Either even with the LABA/LAMA ICS in the inhalation form has no contraindication with any of the oral anti-tubercular drugs. It's plain and simple.
Fantastic, right.
I have a small caveat added to this, because lot of tuberculosis eventually develops a fixed obstruction. Now that fixed obstruction looks like a COPD. You may call it TOPD or a tuberculosis related obstructive pulmonary disease or whatever else terminology that you want to use. But in that subset of patients, if I can by some methodology avoid inhaled corticosteroids, it might be a good idea. But number of reasons. One of them may be that they may be chronic colonizers in the bronchiectatic people, and not using an inhaled corticosteroid if the person is not exacerbating might be a good idea if the bronchodilation is good enough for these patients, at least in the early part of their. Once they start exacerbating, again the inhaled corticosteroid become more or less necessary. So then triple therapy becomes sensible.
Absolutely. So if steroid, definitely it's true that if steroid can be prevented, it's better not to give the steroid during the active part of the tuberculosis.
So can Dr. Gulab Jadhav is asking about, from Nagpur, is asking about whether COVID-19 can lead to COPD.
Early days, we don't know the answer, but I have I have seen hints of obstructive disease in the patients that we are closely following, because we are essentially largely looking at fibrosis or a fibrotic process, restrictive dominant. But there is a hint that yes, just like any other virus, post-viral asthma or obstructive pulmonary disease is being seen. I have seen air trappings documented with a residual volume increase in at least 2 or 3 patients in this post-pandemic scenario. And I would love to use that word post-pandemic. It's not yet over. I think we're still in that pandemic. But
so Vijay, let us percolate it from other viral pneumonia.
Yes.
So, the armamentarium of the causes of COPD,
right?
Yeah.
Injury to noxious particles. Let us smoking, air pollution, occupational exposure is there. And in fact, infective etiology is one of the cause, where tuberculosis, as Nitin rightly told, is one of the cause. And here also viral infections in childhood and in adult. Let us speculate that COVID being a viral pneumonia, definitely it may lead to COPD in later part of life. It may develop, definitely. We have to
Yes.
look into it, whether really COVID does it, but this serious nature of the COVID, its incidence of pulmonary fibrosis, and ultimately airway inflammation, all may tell us that definitely this patient may develop COPD in some part of their life.
Even in my experience, okay, the tendency to mosaic attenuation or air trapping is less common than other viral infections, but
Yes.
we did come across such a kind of airway phenomenon with some amount of reversibility when we offered pulmonary function testing in these patients.
But the other part of it is also very interesting. Most of our COPD patients who have actually got a COVID, they have not died. I mean, I have not lost a single patient with COPD who was my known COPD during this pandemic. I am not one single patient, literally.
Actually, I thought of asking you that because what happened to our COPD exacerbations? Many of our COPD patients are pretty stable. They are pretty good with teleconsultation itself.
Absolutely. So the COPD exacerbations have actually gone down, probably because of the social distancing and the mask wearing. These two are probably contributed to it in a large extent. These people were essentially scared. The other component of it is, of course, whether we are effectively blocking the ACE2 receptors completely by using inhaled corticosteroids, and have they any role? Because most of our patients are on triple therapy one way or the other, for those who are severe. So I think once again that may be having a protective action. So I think it must be a multimodal thing. Many of our patients are already vaccinated for flu as well as pneumococci, and this year we have in fact increased it in the anticipation that once COVID goes away, the flu is going to take over that particular empty space. So I think from that point also, our people are more aggressively vaccinated this year. So all this put together must have created less number of COPD exacerbations over the last 1 year or so. It's a happy year for our COPD patients, at least. There is one subset of patients.
You, Dr. Nitin. Yes. Yeah. So can't agree with you more. So here is Dr. Jai Krishna Mishra from Ghaziabad asking about, in your opinions, both speakers, what is the best triple therapy combination?
So to start with, okay, I already told that from the armamentarium of the steroid, that is budesonide, fluticasone, and beclomethasone. From the armamentarium of the LABA, it is the formoterol and salmeterol. And from the armamentarium of the anticholinergic, long-acting anticholinergic tiotropium and glycopyrronium, we can have a permutation combination. But it has been rightly shown that budesonide, formoterol, again, these two has a synergistic, not only their dose response curve is also good, and from the anticholinergic glycopyrronium is the best one to have a permutation combination. And this has been shown that this works well. In fact, the Kronos and the Ethos study has also proved in that way. So probably these are the three permutation combination drugs which can be used when we are using triple therapy. But again, if a patient, I'm telling you, think of a scenario, a patient who cannot take DPI and already a patient is on salmeterol fluticasone, and you want to add an anticholinergic to that patient. You can add, and the patient is well controlled. There is no harm in it. You are adding a tiotropium or a glycopyrronium nebulized or glycopyrronium inhaler to this patient. You can do that. A patient who is well controlled.
Dr. Now, okay. What is your take on the same question, Dr. Nitin? And then how do you prefer, in a single inhaler versus, multiple inhalers?
Okay. I think both questions are very important. One addition to, I agree with Indranil that, glycopyrronium, formoterol, budesonide is possibly the most well-studied triple therapy combination. So if I'm going to choose, I'll put that as a first preference, but I'll keep cyclosonide in my mind. If I get, because cyclosonide now as a single therapy is also available, And we also have glycopyrronium and formoterol. So then the question of using two inhaler comes in, because right now we don't have a triple combination including cyclosinide, but cyclosinide possibly is the closest competitor to budesonide, maybe a shade better because it is a prodrug and the availability in the throat is much less. We are not really sure whether the incidence of pneumonia with cyclosinide is compared even lower as compared to budesonide, but at the same time, at least the local safety of cyclosinide is better. So I'll keep cyclosinide in mind whenever it is relevant. As far as possible, I would love to use a single inhaler therapy for most of our patients, but in real life, I mean, that doesn't work out because people already are, say, for example, years altogether stable on, even today, who are on, say, formoterol, budesonide, and tiotropium. They are in two different inhalers and they have been very stable. I would not necessarily make a shift from, say, an meter dose inhaler with a spacer to a single inhaler capsule therapy just because a new combination is available. I'll wait for the MDI with a spacer combination available with the same formulation, and then I would make the switch. So I am not going to be in a hurry to make that change to everybody. But my new patients, more and more of them will be initiated on the single inhaler triple therapy as a first choice, because the chance of discontinuation is much, much lower. There is no doubt about that. That data is pretty compelling and convincing.
So Vijay, absolutely true. This triple therapy combination, as of now, it is only in DPI. So
Right.
these elderly patients, COPD patients, whatever the device comes with, low resistance, high resistance, and whatever they tell the drug position is very good, still these very severe COPD patients find this difficult to take the DPI. So at least selection of the patient who can be given a DPI is also important when you are selecting triple therapy in a single
Right.
inhaler.
So this brings to me, my next question to Dr. Nitin. So when do you suggest nebulizations as a prime modality of therapy in your COPD patients?
Yeah, I think some of them select themselves out very early.
Nebulizations.
Yes. So only nebulizations. One, it's a costly affair. Most of the people who go on to, say, home NIV and home oxygen therapy are actually better candidates for this, because they are essentially people who are frailer, older, and they are having a poor hand-eye coordination in any case, in a good percentage of them. So if I find that the person, and I'm sure during their emergencies, we already give them a formoterol budesonide nebulization as a rescue medication in any case. So a large number of them are on formoterol budesonide nebulization as needed. And if they find over a period of time, they select themselves out that, look, I'm getting better with this. Can I continue with this? There is no harm, because formoterol budesonide is available in 0.5 versus, so the typical mid dose range would be 400 plus 400, so 800. So the dose of inhaled steroid doesn't really go up even if I use a formoterol budesonide nebulization 0.5 versus 0.4. So it is not really that higher dose change. And if the patient is very comfortable using it and is not really comfortable using the inhaler, or the other alternative also opens up for them, that during a little increased symptoms, they use a nebulization, and when they are stable, they go back to their inhaler and with meter dose and spacer. So that permutation combination becomes available to them.
Indranil, quickly answer to the same question. Do you want to add anything regarding exclusively when do you prescribe nebulations apart from what Nitin said?
See, again, assisted home inhalation therapy, that is someone doing the inhaler for them, shaking the inhaler, fitting it to the spacer, actuating it, and the patient only just inhale and exhale, is a very good way that I have seen patients doing it, and somebody in their family members or the caregiver can do them. Really frail patient, low inspiratory flow rate, and again poorly controlled patients with the inhaler, not well with the inhalation, they are the real patients. And that too, the home nebulization is not something which is absolute, and we cannot just go back to their inhalation. Once the patient becomes stable with home nebulization, say for a month, 1, 2, 3, or 4 months, we can again switch them from them nebulization to the inhalation. Assisted home inhalation. That's the one I want to.
Okay, neurological patients, okay, CPA patients, all these. So maybe I think it's time for me to close, but quickly few questions. I will take, extra 5 to 10 minutes and then, close it because
But
there is.
I think that no one asked about
questions.
no one asked about this eosinophil level, about the eosinophil level.
No. I'm coming there. Okay. Compare and contrast various reasons for peripheral blood eosinophilia in your pulmonary practice, particularly COPD. Do you suggest sputum inflammatory in your COPD exacerbation management? Indranil, go ahead.
Yes. So this is a real good question. I was expecting the eosinophil levels to be asked. So first thing, in real life practice, we are really not taking the eosinophil count for starting ICS. What is important is there are studies which have shown that blood eosinophil is really correlates with the sputum eosinophil. Doing sputum inflammatory and sputum eosinophil is difficult. We require specialized lab, we require trained personnel, and it is expensive. No training and instrument are that easily available except a very few places. So,
and you have to process in 1 hour.
Absolutely. So
Right.
it is difficult. Blood eosinophil is easier, but again, there are some few controversies. So blood eosinophil varies. Patient on inhaled corticosteroid and oral steroid, the blood eosinophil count will decrease. The helminthic infection and Indian being a tropical country, the blood eosinophil count may be more. Leaving all those aside, a high blood eosinophil count, whatever may be the reason, with a obstructive lung disease, think of starting inhaled corticosteroid. That's the thing. And if the patient is on steroid, by either oral steroid or high dose inhaled corticosteroid, repeat the eosinophil when the patient is on minimum dose of steroid.
Right.
I'll tell you a simple answer to this. Whenever you see a hemogram report, just circle the eosinophil, and
Right.
you will find that it is always above 300 in any case. So you have the license. Don't worry. You have the license in India, almost for everybody.
Right. So, do you use roflumilast in your clinical practice, Dr. Nitin? And what is your take on it?
I do use in patients who are prone to exacerbations,
Right.
and the current status of roflumilast is it's missing from the market. In Pune area, at least for the last 6 months, my patients are just not able to get it. So right now, this is one molecule which is missing. My patients are not getting it, so I am left with no other choice. But at the same time, when there are recurrent exacerbations, this person is a reasonably suitable candidate. In addition to everything else that you're doing, including inhaled corticosteroids, then adding roflumilast is a good idea, definitely.
Here, Dr. Tulian from Mumbai have asked particularly, do you have use in children as well, but at what dose?
Which one?
No. In fact, roflumilast causes a lot of anorexia. And for frail patients, one of the big problems is they get weight loss. So roflumilast is a drug particularly which seems to be reducing appetite in a big way. So be a little cautious there. Children, I have never used it.
So
Sorry.
children, why should you use? It's a drug for COPD. And in children, you cannot expect COPD. So again, roflumilast in the beginning, we were using it, but now we are not using it, knowing fully well the toxicity, the anorectic effect, interaction with theophylline, we are not using. I am not using it.
So Dr. Manish Desai has asked again, is it mandatory to have a eosinophil count to choose combination? Any?
No, I think I've shown you enough data on this. Yeah.
Right.
Good amount of data tells you, irrespective of the eosinophil counts, people who are getting exacerbations are good candidates for inhaled corticosteroids addition. So I don't think you have to now go by absolute strict rule of that. And in any case, as I told you, all you have to do is take a hemogram report and just circle the eosinophils, and they are invariably about 3. So you have the license in any case.
So my take should be that it is not an absolute thing, but it is good to have a blood eosinophil count in your hand. And if it is more than 100 with 2 exacerbations or 1 admission, think of steroid. If it is more than 300, you can jolly well think of steroids. So it is good to have, and you have another tool or logic to start steroid.
Right. Dr. Anantalakshmi from Hyderabad is asking about what should we do if FEV1 is 67 and FEV1 by FVC is normal.
So this is not
How
an
will that
obstructive
happen?
lung disease, I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
this is a restriction. This is like a restriction.
Yes, yes. So in any way, if you see that the FEV1 by FVC ratio is normal, that means it is not an obstructive lung disease. It is something because of the poor effort or because of restriction. Do this spirometry with full maneuver, or if you are still clinically suspecting, you can go for advanced lung function testing.
Yeah, body plethysmography will be valuable here.
So we get a lot of patients, this kind of patients in daily clinical practice. We are seriously thinking of COPD, having full symptoms with full exposure to noxious particle, but the FEV1 by FVC ratio is normal.
Yeah, I think you can do both. In fact, do a residual volume also and do
Absolutely.
a impulse also.
So
Both
you can
will
receive
add
this
information.
spirometry.
Both.
You can receive this spirometry, do a DLCO to this patient. Radiology may be of helpful in a good HRCT scan, or repeat this spirometry in further settings. That is the thing we do.
Dr. Mohan from Hyderabad is asking, I've seen many pulmonologists adding sildenafil to manage pulmonary artery hypertension, that is carpulmonale in COPD. What is your take?
Definitely, I'm telling you, yes, it's true. Just to answer that question, the pulmonary hypertension is because of the hypoxia that is being there. The hypoxia is to be corrected with long-term oxygen therapy. So the long-term oxygen therapy is the treatment for reducing the pulmonary hypertension or managing the pulmonary hypertension in these patients of COPD. But yes, there are a few studies and with good evidence to support that sildenafil is a drug that can be used in pulmonary hypertension in patients with COPD also. So they are not doing any injustice. But yes, without giving long-term oxygen therapy, only sildenafil may not work in these patients.
Yeah, I think you'll have to pick up people with a disproportionate amount of pulmonary hypertensive response to use sildenafil in addition to oxygen. Not using oxygen as internal said is not the choice. Definitely, just using sildenafil, we are going nowhere.
So your both take with tomorrow being, launch of vaccine for our all patients with comorbids and senior citizens. What is your take on, COVID vaccination? Dr. Nitin first.
COVID vaccination is
Yeah.
God's
COPD
great gift. God's great gift to India and the world from India, probably. Everybody who can take the vaccine, who has an access to vaccine, please do take it and don't hesitate taking it. You may get a few side effects, reactions, this and that, but I think get over with it because COVID has a much, much more killing effect. Of course, COPD patients are possibly getting spared, but all the same, in the longer run, we don't know what is going to happen if it keeps coming back again and again in those spurts and waves. Right now, we are going through a second spurt in Pune, and though it is not like the first wave, it's not a massive pandemic, but I think we are still going through a second spurt, and therefore, I think it's a most sensible thing to get vaccinated. Both the vaccines available in India are reasonably good, Covaxin as well as Covishield. So I think no hesitation in my mind to recommend it for almost everybody, unless until there is a direct contraindication or a direct allergic reaction, anaphylactic reaction to previous COVID vaccine. Then you be careful. Otherwise, no other reason to worry.
Your take. Any particular patients you want to say that, please do not take COVID vaccine?
2. Pregnancy, lactating.
COPD.
And COPD, no.
COPD.
All to take it. See, the safety of the vaccine is proved beyond doubt. Minor reaction occurs in any vaccination. Pain in the site, injection site, mild fever is so that we don't have to bother about it. All COPD patients should take the vaccination. That's my recommendation. It's safe.
Right. So, in the interest of time, I'm stopping here. Excellent talk, both of you. Excellent discussion, Dr. Indranil and Dr. Nitin. It was really, I thoroughly enjoyed past 1.5 hours. We can run this session till 10 o'clock as well, but in the interest of time, okay, I'm closing it. I feel, okay, my conclusions here today is add triple therapy on patients who are having exacerbation despite on dual therapy like LABA-LAMA or LABA-ICS, who experience more symptoms and effort intolerance, despite on, dual therapy. Patients who are having exacerbations with an eosinophil count greater than 300, 100, okay, and all patients you can try in the eosinophil count greater than 300. Probably, last but not least conclusion, since single inhaler has shown better compliance than using multiple inhalers, so I prefer to go ahead with triple therapy using a single inhaler when compared to multiple inhalers. So with this, I would love to close the session. Final comments, Dr. Nitin, and in 1 minute, and Dr.
Yeah.
Indran.
Yeah, from my side, yes to everything that you said. Perfect. Spot on. No additions needed. Additional.
Right, Indranil.
Vote of thanks. Thanks to CCI. Thanks to
I'll do that. That's my job. That's my job.
And Nitin. And lastly, the audience who have been with us for such a long time, hearing in a Sunday evening. That's the real thing that we can see. And
I got to know there are 900 plus logins. So exact number is yet to come. Thanks to brilliant support from Cipla team and then technical team Vinod, Puneet, and Vipul and his team, and Krishna Anna, our beloved chairman trustee, and Narayan Pradeepa, Atri, Narendra, Ravi Doshi. Fantastic combination of very dynamic people in CCI. Thanks to CCI for giving me this opportunity, for giving us this opportunity to do a brilliant session on Sunday evening. Thank you. Love you all. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.